If you are close to retirement with at least 1 million saved, chances are you carry some version of this fear. What if I run out of money? But when we look at the data for wealthy retirees, the opposite problem is actually far more common. Not running out of money, but never even coming close to running out and quietly underspending for decades. In fact, this pattern is so widespread that one study in the Journal of Financial Planning gave it a name, the consumption gap. This is the gap between what a retiree could safely spend from their portfolio and what they end up actually spending. And spoiler, the consumption gap was not tiny, it was massive. So in this video, we're going to walk through how common this really is and what the data says about retirees who have too much saved relative to what they spend, why this happens, the mindset trap that keeps wealthy retirees living like they are on the verge of going broke, and the best reframe I have found after working with hundreds of retirees to help you start spending more safely without feeling reckless or irresponsible. By the way, if you're new here, I'm Rachel Camp. I am a CFP professional and the founder of Camp Wealth, and let's get into it. A study in the Journal of Financial Planning looked at how retiree spending actually changed over time in the 2000s. The results were shocking. Affluent retirees who were relying on their portfolios in retirement were failing to even spend their annual income. That is income for retirees that's typically in the form of pensions and Social Security. Even those guaranteed income sources weren't being fully spent. That means a portion of them were actually being saved. And this was in a period that included a rough stretch for the markets. The study was conducted from 2000 to 2008. So you'd expect portfolios to shrink over time as retirees take consistent withdrawals. But that's not what happened. On average, the assets of these wealthy retirees still increased during retirement in a very mediocre to below average market. And that is the consumption gap in action. For retirees in the top wealth percentiles, actual spending was well below what their asset base could safely support. Enough that, on average, their portfolios continue to grow. Even when the researchers set aside a huge chunk of assets for longevity risk, medical costs, and legacy goals, the consumption gap was still substantial. In the highest wealth group, it was as high as 47.3%. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. We keep referencing wealthy retirees. What is actually wealthy here? What does that mean? Well, in this study, wealthy retirees are roughly the top 20% of retirees by net worth. And if we look at today's numbers, to land in that ballpark for ages 60 to 64, you'd be looking at around 1.6 million in net worth. So if you're heading into retirement with 1, 2 million or more, you're very likely in or near this group. And the data says your biggest risk may not be spending too much, it may be spending far too little. While these retirees are rich on paper, their spending reflects a completely different reality. And this was the case with a couple I met with recently in their late 50s who had just retired. For this purpose, we'll call them Howard and Susan. After 3 decades of saving, their brains weren't magically ready to switch from protection to enjoyment. They were used to watching their portfolio grow and never touching it. On paper, everything looked perfect. We had 2 successful careers, both incredibly smart and diligent, and a $3 million portfolio at retirement. And yet both of them were still terrified. They had retired without a financial planner, so they did hours of research and still could not bring themselves to spend beyond the bare minimum. They checked their accounts constantly, they followed the markets, they followed the news, they said no to trips with their adult children, they were cutting back in small ways that did not match their reality, and financially they were completely fine, but emotionally what they were doing was dangerous. See, in their 50s, they were wasting very healthy and active years they could never get back. So when we sat down together, we ran projections and tested different market scenarios. And in every realistic scenario based on their current level of spending, they were on track to leave behind a multi-7-figure inheritance, even in below average markets. So here's the key part about Howard and Susan and about many couples I work with. They were living on about 1/3 of what they could safely afford. They had no real desire to leave a big inheritance to their already successful children. This money was for them. It was to enjoy their retirement, to exhale after demanding careers, to actually experience the life that they had worked for. And yet, the gap between what they could spend and what they allowed themselves to spend was enormous. Now, researchers call it the consumption gap. I like to think of it as the enjoyment gap, which is what you can spend subtracted by what you allow yourself to spend. That enjoyment gap represents a very real opportunity cost. It's not just a line item in a spreadsheet, it's how much of your own life you're missing out on. From what I see, this gap is primarily driven by two forces. Number one, a saving habit that becomes an identity. Many wealthy retirees have what I'd call an accumulation addiction. For decades, you've been rewarded, emotionally and financially, for protecting, growing, never touching your portfolio. So, of course, spending it down feels wrong. Drawing from the portfolio doesn't just feel like a financial decision, it feels like breaking a core habit that has served you incredibly well for decades. You've been excellent at this habit. Retirement asks you to just completely reverse it. Now, the second force here is fear, specifically fear of all the unknowns in retirement. You're not really worried about today, you're worried about later. What if I need long-term care? What if my health declines and expenses spike? What if the market crashes again at the worst possible time? What if I'm 85 years old and I can't make ends meet? Most people justify underspending by saying, I'd rather have too much than risk not being able to pay bills in my 80s or 90s. And I understand this is a very real, it feels like a very real fear. But here's the problem. Most wealthy retirees aren't even spending anywhere close to that catastrophic level. They're often well below what research would consider a conservative withdrawal rate. For example, a 2024 Prudential study looked at married 65-year-olds with at least $100,000 in financial assets, and they found that on average, these couples were withdrawing about 2.1% from their portfolio. That's roughly half of what many conservative safe spending guidelines suggest, even under bad market conditions. Behaviorally, this is classic catastrophizing, and it leads directly to deep underspending and a massive enjoyment gap. The good news is, there is a way to break the savings habit and calm the fear of all the unknowns in retirement, but it does require a major reframe of how you see your money in your retirement. So the first reframe we're looking at here is defining your rock bottom spending level. With Howard and Susan, we went back to the basics. The question wasn't how much could you spend in a perfect world, it was what is your rock bottom spending level, the amount designed to survive these catastrophes that we're thinking about. If you've heard of the 4% rule, very simply, it comes from research asking if someone retired for 30 years, started by withdrawing 4% of their portfolio, and then increased that dollar amount each year with inflation, would they have run out of money in the worst market environments we've ever seen? Historically, with a 4% withdrawal, the answer is no. That means 4% is not some aggressive target, it's not an average, it is a floor. This is a Great Depression level withdrawal rate. And safe withdrawal rate research actually goes even further. We see that at a 4% starting withdrawal rate, it often has a very high probability of leaving more than your original principal after 30 years. And only a small fraction of histories did retirees end with less than what they started with. So when people talk about the 4% rule, they often miss the point. It's designed to survive brutal conditions. That reframe alone helps a lot of retirees. A bad market is not going to sneak up on you silently. If you retire into something like a 1929 style environment, you're going to know things are rough and you will have time to respond. And here's the kicker. With a 4% starting withdrawal rate, it is far more likely that you'll have room to increase spending over time than you'll ever be forced to spend that 4% withdrawal rate forever. Now, I want to address an elephant in the room because I work with a lot of early retirees, which means longer than the standard 30-year time horizon. If you're retiring in your 50s like Howard and Susan, you might be planning for 40 years or more for your time horizon. And as this stretches out, that floor does not completely collapse, it just drifts slightly lower. So for many early retirement plans, that floor is closer to about 3.5%. And this is really considered the floor for safe withdrawal rates. No matter your time horizon, that is the bottom level that we could safely spend. So if we want to be conservative with a 40-year retirement, we might say instead of 4% as the worst case scenario rate, we can drift it down to 3.5% as your rock bottom spending level. That gives you a clear evidence-based minimum. If things feel scary, this is what I will still allow myself to spend. Anything above this is optional, but the floor is mine to use. So with Howard and Susan, we use safe withdrawal rate research to find their rock bottom spending number, the lifestyle that still holds up under severe stress. And also, we write it down clearly. Something like, every year in retirement, we give ourselves permission to spend at least this amount, adjusted for inflation, even if headlines are scary. That clarity alone started to shrink their enjoyment gap. Now that's the floor. The second thing I like to look at here is bonus spending. Now, one of the biggest real risks in retirement is retiring into a bad market. The first decade of returns can set the tone for your entire retirement, and this is what we call sequence of returns risk. Most people try to handle this by hoarding cash, overloading on bonds, or just never increasing their spending. But research shows one of the most powerful defenses against poor sequence of returns isn't hiding from the markets, it's actually just being flexible in your spending. So your risk isn't that you spend money, your risk is when your spending is fixed and you refuse to adjust, which we already have seen is not the case for these wealthy retirees. So I like to do two things. First, separate your spending into fixed and discretionary. So fixed, of course, are expenses that can't go away. It's a mortgage if you still have one, insurance, groceries, utilities, healthcare. These are the non-negotiables. And then discretionary is on top of that. It's travel, gifts, upgrades. This is the fun money. These are the things you could dial back on if you needed to. So second thing we'll do here is to adjust that discretionary spending based on what's already happened in the markets, not based off what we're guessing will happen next. So one simple framework I really like, and I go into more detail on it on another video I have on 4% withdrawals. This is inspired by Nick Majuli's flexible spending strategy. So it looks like this. Let's say your base spending is $75,000. This is what you determine you never want to drop below in retirement. We then have another $25,000, which we designate as discretionary, or I like to call it bonus spending. So total potential spending is $100,000. Now each year, what you're going to do is look at where the market is relative to its recent high and adjust only the bonus spending. So if the market is within 10% of its all-time high, you spend 100% of your discretionary or bonus budget. If it is down 10 to 20%, you spend half of your bonus budget. And if it is down more than 20%, you pause discretionary spending completely for that year. Psychologically, this does two things. First, it gives you permission to fully enjoy your lifestyle in normal markets. And second, it gives you a simple, rules-based way to pull back when markets are rough without panicking or guessing. Now, the third thing I like to talk about here, the third reframe, is to get honest about what you're giving up. Here's the hard truth I share with a lot of high net worth retirees. You're not avoiding being a burden on your children. You're guaranteeing you never get to be the beneficiary of the money that you worked for. Most high net worth retirees are overtrained savers and undertrained spenders. It makes sense. You spent decades practicing restriction and discipline and delayed gratification. But values-based spending, which is intentionally using money to support what really matters, is a completely different skill set, one that we have to build up. This means your identity has to shift. So we have to go from protector and accumulator to wise steward and intentional spender. You don't have to flip the switch overnight. I know that's really hard to do, but you do have to start, and we can start small. Pick one or two areas where you'd like to enjoy your money more. Think about travel, family experiences, time freedom, and set very specific rules for how you will spend there. And then, and this is often the uncomfortable part, keep those promises to yourself. You might set rules like, if my plan is above a 95% Monte Carlo success rate, I will increase travel by X amount every year. If markets are within 10% of all-time highs, I say yes to trips with my kids and grandkids. For disciplined savers, the fear that your spending will suddenly spiral out of control is almost always the opposite of reality. After working with many retirees, here's what I found. Your real retirement risk might not be running out of money. It might be never letting yourself enjoy or use it. If you want help turning your savings into a strategic, sustainable spending plan, one that protects your wealth and upgrades your lifestyle, click the link below to book a call. We'll look at your numbers, goals, and create a framework that balances financial security with genuine enjoyment. You didn't save all this money to worry about it. You saved it so you could finally live with it. I'll see you in the next video.